Hi, it's Mike Stevenson here. Today we're going to talk about how you can use Turbo360's business activity monitoring from the Frends iPaaS platform. So we'll have a quick look to begin with at Turbo360. So here I am, I'm in the business activity monitoring module up here, and on the left hand side here we've got these tree views that represent all of the different business processes that I have in my organization, and I can group them by folders. And if you imagine Turbo360 BAM is a bit like a technology-agnostic business process dashboard, so you can have various automations and integration processes that share events to your integration platform. Um, and then from business activity monitoring, people who are not integration experts can come and see what's going on. So you can see at the top over here, I've got various folders for integrations related to different departments. Now, today we're going to have a look at the playpen area, which is where I just put a couple of ad hoc demos for trying things out. So I've created a business process here for my Frends demo. And what I want to do is I've got two types of process in this this particular business process. So I've got, if we have a look, I can probably drag that across slightly there. So you can see I've got two different transactions here. So I've got import customers from CRM. So if you think of that as being a bit like a batch job that syncs customers between two systems. And then I've got these customer update order messages, and they're a bit more like an event pushing an integration, pushing a message through the system. So what I want to be able to do is show my users when the sync job happens and also when the order updates happen. So what I'm seeing here is for the order updates, we've got the customer ID and we've got the order ID, and we could search by them. And here, if you notice, I've got the user who triggered the Frends process. I've got the process name here. I've also got the version number. There's basically a number of different properties you can publish. So some of them would be sort of Frends system properties. You can also publish your own custom data, which is how the order ID and everything appear there. So you can really model out a view that makes sense for your sort of business user. Now, what I can do, for example, here is, let's say this sync process. I can click on that. I can open it up, and then I can click on some of these shapes that I want to have a look at. I can see from the shape details here, I can see some of the details that came in. I can see a message body. So I've got some properties that came in. This is the properties that I sent from the Frends event. You can see, if you notice here, I've chosen to include the execution ID, which should give me a good link back to Frends. And then we can also have a message body if we choose to as well. So I can see what's happening in each of these processes. That was the sync one. The order update's much simpler. It's just the process started, the process updated. Now, what you can do is with Turbo360, beyond just simple tracking and tracing and viewing what happened, you can also configure options like reprocessing. So if you notice at the top here, I haven't configured it on this particular demo, but if I do, you'd have the option with a button at the top there to reprocess. So maybe your Frends process picks up from a service bus queue, processes a message. You could maybe share that message with Turbo360, and then the end user can resubmit if there was a problem, or they could repair and resubmit if you wanted them to. And a number of other sort of advanced scenarios come into play. Okay, so at this point, that's really a high level of what we're trying to get in Turbo360 to empower our users. So if we take a look at how we'd implement this in Frends, so here's an example of my customer import process. So the shapes that I've got in green here, these are the ones that do the BAM piece. So how I've implemented this process, for anyone who's not familiar with Frends, at the start, I've got the option to trigger it manually or trigger it on a schedule. And then the first thing we're going to do is make a call to Turbo360 here. So that'll call out to the API. It'll create like that new transaction record. and then we're going to get back a transaction ID that you can see here, and then we're going to use that transaction ID elsewhere in this process. Now, one of the things you can do with Frends here, just to simulate a real world scenario, I've called a sub process here, here, and here. And if you imagine this one's going to go and get the data from CRM. We'll then do a checkpoint to BAM to say we've got the data. We're then going to do some kind of transformation. And then here we would upload the data into our target systems, or we prepare it and then upload it. And then finally here we'll do a checkpoint to indicate the process is complete. So that'll give us a scenario where, if you imagine those sub-processes, they may contain lots of complicated technical logic. So I've really just put a layer on top so it's easy to see the BAM shapes, but really, those BAM calls can just be HTTP triggers that you can either run direct to Turbo360, or you could potentially run them through the APIM feature of Frends and act as a proxy using that feature. You'd also be able to do things like, if you put some compensation patterns in here, if you've got like an error scenario, you'd be able to make a call to log an error to Turbo360, for example, as well. Now, we'll just have a quick look. So if we take the start transaction shape here, so you can see on the side here, we'll just be able to scroll down. You can see we're going to do a post. We get a J token back. We pass in a URL to trigger the message, and then to trigger the API call, then we'll just craft a message here. So if you notice, we've got this message header section where I've just crafted a JSON, and I've put some of those properties from Frends into the message. So in Turbo360, my support people would be able to see some of the key things like the process name and that kind of thing. Now, you could do some quite advanced scenarios really here with Frends. So one of the things you could do is you could have messages going across multiple different flows or processes where you can combine them into a single view in Turbo360. So that idea of one sort of business transaction flowing across multiple different processes could be visualized to the end user, or you could have multiple transactions. And before I was seeing two transactions side by side, so you could maybe have let's say you had an event published a service bus, and then two different processes handled those. You could maybe have those as two different transactions in Turbo360, but you basically pass some data in over here, and then we go further down. You can see you just supply some headers which tell Turbo360 which process it is, which transaction, if you want to archive the message or anything like that. And then back over here, once you've got the data coming in, we would have modeled the design time of a transaction here. So this is really the very simplified view. So you can see I've got, my Frends process might have 100 shapes to achieve that full process, but here I'm just putting those key milestones I want to show to the business end user. And I can do things like define properties. So, an example would be that Frends username comes in. I can promote that so it would appear in the grid over here, so that the users can search by friend, the Frends username or something like that. So hopefully that gives you a view of how easy it is to create a business dashboard that's technology agnostic. So, one of the things might be I've got Frends stuff coming into here. Some of my IT department, I might have a bunch of data processing where I've got events from Databricks. I might have other teams are using Power Automate. Some teams might be using Logic Apps or MuleSoft or something. But the idea is that with business activity monitoring, you create that technology agnostic dashboard where you've got a single view of these transactions, and people can go looking and managing the sync of an order, regardless of which technology it's been implemented in. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video. We'd love to have a chat with you if you're interested in this scenario, and we can show you it in more detail. Thanks for joining. Take care.